Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to NatCat's Bookish Cafe. Today I am going to go through my August reading wrap up. Alright guys, thank you in advance for helping me pick the books that I read in the month of August. This month, every time I was ready to start a new book, I put a poll in my community section and gave you guys about 24 to 48 hours to vote on that, and then whichever one had the highest amount of ratings once I was ready to start that book would be the one that I picked up. That being said, usually the way that I do my wrap-ups is I review them from my lowest rated to my highest rated. However, this month I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to do it in the order in which I created the polls. That way I can let you know which books were an option to choose, which one you chose, and then what my thoughts were. But before we get into the reviews, we're going to go through some very basic stats for the month. So here in the month of August, I ended up reading a very similar amount that I did the month before. I ended up reading 9 books, which I think for me is starting to become a relatively solid number. I'm very happy with that. On top of that, I ended up reading 1,930 pages, which is, I kid you not, literally 1 page less than I read the month before. As far as audiobooks go, I did read 2 audiobooks or listen to 2 audiobooks, and that came to 19.12 hours worth of audiobooks. As far as star ratings go, we are finally above a 4.0 again. It's been a couple months, but we got an average rating of 4.22. On top of that, I do want to say I DNF'd 2 books and I temporarily DNF'd 1 book, and those are not included in these stats. Before we get into the books you chose for me, I have 2 audiobooks that I read towards the beginning of the month that were available to me after I was on hold for them for a while, so I went ahead and prioritized those. So I'm going to go through those real quick. The first is Will Prescribe You a Cat by Sayu Ishida, and I picked this book up because I needed a magical realism book, and I do like cats. That being said, this is a Japanese translated fiction. Magical realism, even when it includes cats, which it seems to a lot of times when it comes to Japanese magical realism, unfortunately doesn't really work for me. That being said, I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. It is more a collection of short stories. Essentially, there is this clinic that people who are having mental health issues or just having difficulties in life go to. Usually they hear about it from a friend of a friend of a friend of a cousin kind of situation, and they kind of wander around and are like, where is this place? And right before they give up, they spot it and head in there and are like, hey doctor, I don't have an appointment. And they're like, oh well, the next patient isn't here, so we'll just see you. And then after they hear the person's woes, they'll be like, yeah, we'll prescribe you a cat. And the person's like, what? And essentially they prescribe them different cats and they bring the cats home, and some way or another these cats kind of help redirect their life in such a way that positively impacts them. There were a few of these stories that I did enjoy, and there were a few of them that I didn't care for quite as much, which is the case with most short stories. I will say the further you get into the book and the more you kind of learn about how this clinic came about, the more fantastical it becomes. And in the end, you really get to see the fantasy element of this story. I didn't think it was terrible. As a cat lover, I enjoyed all the different characteristics of the cats and seeing these people kind of resistant to the changes that the cats brought, but in the end kind of giving into it, because who can say no to a cat? I'm literally looking at Loki right now. Lord knows I cannot say no to him. So I think as far as these magical realism feel good books that are coming out of Japan a lot lately, at least I've been seeing them coming out a lot, this one so far has been my favorite. I definitely think it is worth checking out. I think there is a second book. I am not going to be reading that. I think I got what I needed out of this and don't need to continue with the series, but I can very easily see this series becoming something similar to the, what is that series called? It's like When the Coffee Gets Cold. I haven't read that one yet, but I definitely think that those two series probably give similar vibes. The next one I read was A Sinister Revenge by Diana Raybourn. This is, I believe, the 7th Veronica Speedwell book. I think so, because I think I only have book 8 left, which I'm on hold for right now, and then I'll be all caught up with the series. I'm trying not to panic because I swear right now these are like the only audiobooks that I actually feel like listening to. But that being said, as usual, I love Veronica Speedwell. I love Stoker. I love these stories. I love the writing, the relationships, the characters. Everything in these stories is just spot on, especially the dialogue and the banter is just a 10 out of 10. I ended up giving this one a 4.5 stars. We start this book with Veronica and Stoker's relationship a little bit on the fritz, but at the beginning of this book, the two of them have to end their little time apart. Distance makes the heart grow fonder, right? And that is because one of Stoker's relatives has discovered that they are potentially going to be murdered by someone who blames him and his friends for a death many years ago. And Stoker and Veronica need to figure out if one, that death from many years ago was in fact an accident, or if that person was murdered, and who is seeking a revenge. I had a good time with this, just like I did with all of the others. I did enjoy the change in scenery. We got a little bit out of England in this book as we visited Stoker and his family home. There was a lot of characters in this that I really enjoyed, a lot of strong female characters, which is not uncommon within this series, but I always find myself so enthralled by all these women who are so in love with the field of science, especially within a time period where they're not really allowed to work within that. So I think that Diana Raybourn really does a good job of exploring strong women within a time period where women are relatively oppressed. So once again, glad that I got to spend a little bit more time with Stoker and Veronica. I will later in the video have one more book that I'll talk about that you guys didn't select for me, but since I decided to read that later in the month, I'm going to just push that off for now. Let's get into the books that you selected. The first poll I put up for you was between Unwell Women and Black Wisdom. And as you can see, Unwell Women ended up winning. And unfortunately, this is going to be my first DNF of the month. This was a book I was incredibly excited for, but I ended up DNFing it on page 128. In the middle of a chapter, eventually I just decided this book was not giving me what I wanted. So this book talks a lot about how women's health has been viewed throughout history. And obviously, if you are a woman, and especially if you're a woman possibly who's been pregnant or experienced any sort of health issues or chronic health issues, you know that the medical world isn't the easiest or most helpful for us to navigate. And I really had specific expectations for this book. I was hoping that this book would spend a little bit more time talking about how women had positively taken care of their own health throughout history. Oftentimes you hear a lot about how women were able to, in ancient times essentially, heal themselves, care for each other, midwifery, all of that jazz. And even not just women, but non-Western civilizations, that a lot of indigenous communities' health towards women was a lot better than it was in more European countries. So I was kind of hoping that we would go back and say, hey, this tribe did this and this, and this tribe did this and that, and these people in South America did this and this, and it was really positive. And then the colonizers came along and they mucked everything up, and now everything is like this, and now we need to try and move back towards this because history shows us that this worked really well for women's health. And that's not really what this was. I think I was hoping this would take a more naturopathic way or approach to women's health, but instead we got like one chapter about what the men of ancient Greece were saying and how what they were saying kind of stuck around in Western beliefs among male physicians for the next few centuries. And then we kind of jumped to the 19th century, talked about how women suck and men are just like, wow, women are just so weak and pathetic, and they are partially the blame for the bubonic plague because of the humors oozing out of their wombs. And then it kind of jumped into like more modern days and like women fighting for the right to vote. And I was like, wait. Why are we not focusing on more ancient times? Why are we jumping into modern day medicine so much? I wasn't that interested in that because I know about modern day medicine. I know how much it sucks. I want to hear how women's health was handled before it got mucked up by religious beliefs and patriarchy and misogyny and just male egos and all of that. And unfortunately, that is just not what this book seems to be doing. And so I decided to go ahead and put it down because, no offense to the women who fought for a right to vote, thank you, that's not what I picked this book up for. So it was a DNF for me, unfortunately. I guess depending on what you're looking for, this might be for you. But if you were like me and you were hoping to learn a little bit more about how women's health had been practiced throughout history, throughout the world, this is very Western based, and I think that's just not what I wanted. Here is the poll for the first fiction book that you guys chose for me. And as you can see, Patience by Sophie Lark ended up winning. And oh, thank you guys, because honestly, this book I was the least interested in. And when I saw it won, I was kind of like, okay, I guess I'll give it a try. I gave it 5 stars. Okay, I guess you guys just know better than me. So thank you again. I absolutely adored this book. In fact, if you saw my September TBR, you will know that I put another book by this author on it because I enjoyed her work so much. This is the first book in a trilogy of companion novels. However, the series that I am starting now by this author is a trilogy that came before it. So while I love this book, I would maybe pick up that other trilogy. The first one is called The Devil's Mark first, just because in this book there was a lot of references to things that happened in that series, which is why I was like, I have to pick this up and figure out what was going on here. So in this book, we are following Fairy and Leo, and these are soulmates. They met in ancient times when Fairy, who was an archangel, was kind of getting his butt kicked by some kind of like sorcerer-like beings, and Leo ended up healing him. And as soon as Fairy saw him, he was like, yes, you are the one I am meant to spend my life with. Problem though is that as an angel, it is frowned upon to mate with a human, and during this time Lucifer has decided to start his war against god. And our character Fairy decides to join Lucifer's side because he is being promised that he can be with Leo if Lucifer wins. Unfortunately, as we know, Lucifer does not win, and Fairy ends up falling, and his punishment is to become the ferryman, essentially the Grim Reaper kind of situation. Now, on top of that, Leo ends up dying in this war, but a friend of Fairy's ends up binding Leo's soul to hers, saying that essentially he will be reincarnated over and over and over again, and the two of them can spend 1 hour together after every one of his lives, which is obviously very painful for them to have to spend decades apart, have just an hour together, and then be apart again over and over and over again. This angel said that as soon as she dies, Leo will no longer reincarnate, which will allow Fairy to go to him and reconnect their mate bond. However, if Leo dies, he won't reincarnate. He will be gone forever. So at the beginning of this book, this angel ends up dying in another battle, and it is time for Fairy to leave the underworld, find Leo, and reconnect their mating bond. However, Leo never remembers his previous lives, so obviously he does not remember Fairy. And unfortunately for Fairy, in this life, Leo seems to think he's straight. So that complicates things a little bit more. I instantly connected to these characters. From the very beginning, it starts with that battle scene where the two of them are thinking they're about to die, and the just love and devotion that you can see that they have for each other, just like in the first paragraph that you meet these two, was like kind of blew my mind a little bit. I would be so bold as to compare the vibes to what you would get from like Achilles and Patroclus in the Song of Achilles, and I think that was one of the reasons that I instantly fell in love with these characters, because obviously I love the Song of Achilles, so any people that give me those vibes, I'm going to fall in love with them. On top of that, I thought Fairy was such a great character. This book is called Patience because, man, does this man have so much patience. He understands that Leo right now thinks he's straight, and that he can't just be like, no, you're not, ha ha ha, and just like blow that up in his face. He shows a lot of patience. He respects Leo's boundaries, and he never pushes Leo outside of his comfort zone. He is always supportive with everything that he needs. He is 10 out of 10, the kind of man you want pursuing you. Like, he definitely knows what he wants, but he's gonna make sure that Leo is comfortable with every step that they take. I also feel like this book had a good sense of like humor to it as well, with Leo kind of being like, wait a minute, like, why am I so upset anytime any other man like even looks at Fairy? Because like, why would I care about that? Like, we're just friends. So it very much has those vibes where someone is instantly possessive of someone else and very confused about why they are because Leo's past self definitely has a jealousy streak, and that definitely reincarnated with him. On top of that, it has a great kind of like little found family vibe. Fairy has been alone in the underworld for a very long time. He has made some friends, but those friends have been able to come and go from hell in a way that Fairy couldn't. And now he's kind of finally able to really settle into this friend group, as well as develop this relationship with Leo. So it's got a lot of great vibes. Smut was good, and like I said, I absolutely adore the characters. And the plot was definitely interesting enough for me to go ahead and pick up other books by this author so that I could learn a little bit more about the past of these other characters that were featured in the story. So you guys started off strong with a 5-star pick. All right, here is the next poll. I wanted you guys to choose one of the books that was still on my summer TBR. I had it between the Sunbearer Trials and Canto Contigo. Obviously, the Sunbearer Trials won by quite a bit, and I cannot complain because I also gave this book 5 stars. In fact, I am currently reading Celestial Monsters, the second book in this series, and while I'm only about 50 pages in, I'm already very excited to be back with these characters. This is a YA fantasy story. We are following a trans main character named Tio, and he is the son of a goddess of birds. Essentially, he is a jade god. In this world, there are 3 different types of gods. There are the golds, the jades, and the obsidians. However, many centuries ago, the obsidians were locked away because they were rather cruel. They kind of saw humans as beings that are to worship them and to do their bidding, instead of having humans like worship them and then return that worship with any sort of favors. So the golds had decided it would be best to just lock those guys away because they were causing a lot of trouble. And the god who did this was Sol, the sun god, and they did this by sacrificing their body, and they became these stones that every god keeps at the top of their temple, and it essentially creates the prison that the obsidian gods and their celestial beings are trapped in. Every 10 years, these stones need to be replenished with power, and in order to do that, they hold the Sunbearer Trials, where 10 children of the gods are selected to compete in the trials, and whoever gains the most points is the Sun Bearer, which is obviously a very coveted title. However, who gets the least amount of points becomes the sacrifice, which is also seen as an honor because you kind of keep the apocalypse at bay. And usually it is only the gold gods who are selected because their children are seen as stronger, they are seen as heroes, while the jade gods are just seen as weaker beings. However, this year, not only 1, but 2 jade gods are selected. And of course, our main character is one of them. This book was just a lot of fun. I mean, if you like trials, which I know a lot of us do, this book is definitely gonna be up your alley. But I also absolutely adored the characters. We have Tio, but he also has a friend who is a gold, and she is just rambunctious and confident and outspoken. She's a very strong woman who, despite being a gold, is a big advocate for her jade friends. And then there's the other jade, who I need to figure out how to say his name. I keep calling him Chio, but I'm not sure. It's Xio, and I'm worried that I'm pronouncing it kind of like if it was a Mandarin name, which it isn't. So I'm gonna have to... Sorry, my cat just ran by. I think he's chasing a squirrel that has been trying to make a home in one of our trees. But that being said, he is the other jade god that has been selected. He's 13 years old. He is the son of the god of bad luck, and boy does he have bad luck. And Tio is dedicated to keeping him alive and out of the last spot in the trials. And so it definitely has a little bit of a found family aspect to it. I think that this book did a really good job of building this world and kind of showing how the golds live compared to how Tio, our main character, lives. Like, a lot of the things that he was experiencing for the first time, all these luxuries that he was experiencing a while in the trial, are just things that the golds experience day to day. So I felt like it did a good job of showing that even though these people make a big sacrifice to keep the obsidians, the cruels, at bay, they themselves are a little bit problematic, and they definitely could improve their own system. And I feel like these 2 jade gods being thrown into the mix kind of opened people's eyes to that a little bit. And so I had a wonderful time with this. I have read Aiden Thomas before, so I just know that they are an author I really enjoy. And so thank you for allowing me to pick up another book by them. All right, next I finally allowed you to pick an audiobook for me, and your two options were These Vicious Games as well as The Other Woods, and you ended up selecting The Other Woods. Now, unfortunately, this became my second DNF, which was very disappointing because, I mean, first of all, there's a cat on the cover, so that should be right up my alley, a little kitty companion. Unfortunately, that was not enough to get me interested in this book. I ended up DNFing this book at 37%. It is a relatively short audiobook, only about 8 hours long, so I didn't get very far into it, but I just could not get into the story. I could not connect to this character. Was I excited that we were reading a middle grade story with a non-binary character? Yes, I really like that. However, I don't want to seem mean or anything, but this character was just too wimpy for me. Was it more realistic that we had this young character who was scared of the monsters around them? Yes, but maybe I grew up with stronger young protagonists for too long that characters like this, I'm just like, come on, get it together. We got monsters to fight. So in this book, we are following River, and River is able to see beings from the other woods as well as spirits, which they don't like. They don't like that at all. They're like, this is really creepy. There's a giant cockroach monster under my bed, and I don't like that. Reasonable. However, they have recently found that the other woods is trying more and more to entice them into them. And they're like, no, I don't want to go in there. It's a no for me. And usually they're kind of a loner because people think they're weird because every once in a while they look like they've seen a ghost. Because they have. However, this girl ends up befriending them, and they're like, oh my god, I kind of have a crush on her and I can't believe she wants to be friends with me. And they end up hanging out, and then she gets kidnapped and dragged into the other woods, and they're like, well, I tried to have friends and maybe she's dead now. However, luckily for that girl, River is gathering up all their strength and heading into the other woods with their cat to see if they can rescue her. Now, at the time that I DNF'd, River had kind of just gotten into the other woods and was starting their adventure there. So I would definitely say, for me personally, the story had a pretty slow start, which for a middle grade I feel is like kind of surprising, because I feel like a younger kid would be even more bothered by the slow beginning, but I don't know. Just me personally, I wish we had gotten to the other woods portion a little bit sooner, especially considering how short the book was. I was hoping to give the book a chance until River reached the other woods and then kind of see if maybe things picked up. But unfortunately, once we got to the other woods, I found that my interest just didn't increase. So unfortunately, this was a DNF for me. I would never tell someone not to pick up this book. I think it was just personal preference. For me, characters are very important. And since I didn't click with River, I think that really made me struggle with this story. But I'm sure River will become a beloved character for many other people. All right, your next poll for physical books was a couple of novellas. You could choose either When Among Crows or What Feasts at Night, and you ended up choosing What Feasts at Night, so thank you for allowing me to continue a series. Unfortunately, this book did not really work for me. So this is a sequel to What Moves the Dead, which I had a decent time with. However, did that book need to be turned into a series? No. This book I ended up giving 3 stars. If I had to choose a book that represents a mid book, this is it. I feel like I don't really have anything bad to say about it, but I don't have anything good to say about it either. I really just feel like I read this book and I have already started to forget. the story, it just didn't do anything for me whatsoever. I just felt like in this book, I didn't really care for the characters. I didn't care for the plot. I didn't care for the lore that was being explored. So, I mean, T. Kingfisher has good writing. I'm going to read more work of hers. However, after reading this, I actually decided to cancel my pre-order for the third book because I'm not going to continue with this series. I'm going to read other works by her, but I think there's a lot of people who don't really like this series or don't feel like it needed a continuation, and I am in agreement with them. It was blah. I really don't have anything to say about this book whatsoever. I mean, plot-wise, we're following the same character from the first book. However, they have returned to their home country and are staying at a hunting cabin that belonged to their family, and there seems to be some sort of mythical like being that is causing trouble for the people on this land. Yeah. As soon as I finished this book, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna have anything to say about this book. So yeah, 3 stars. I mean, 3 stars might seem like a high rating for a book that I feel nothing for, but it wasn't offensive. It wasn't like the most boring. It wasn't like terrible, but it exists. This book exists. Since I DNF'd my nonfiction book, I went ahead and gave you guys another option, and that was either Jesus and John Wayne or Poverty by America. And this was a really close one. It was tied for a long time. In fact, I had to wait like an extra day or so to even start reading one of these books because there was no winner. However, Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond won. And I have read a book by this author before, which was Evicted, and I gave that 5 stars, and I gave this 5 stars as well. I was not sure if I would finish this book this month. However, as you can tell, this whole section of the book is just like references and notes. So the book itself is relatively short, and I did end up finishing it and putting a ton of tabs into this. Essentially, this is the author trying to figure out why is America, which is such a wealthy and supposedly prosperous nation, full of so much poverty, and it has been for generations since its existence, since its creation, and it doesn't look like it's gonna change anytime soon. Like, what the heck is going on? And that is what is explored in this book. I will admit that there were a lot of things in this book that I already know, just because I run in the circles where people are well aware of why certain people are in power and why certain people are kept poor and downtrodden. But that being said, I in no way would discourage anyone from reading this book. I was completely enthralled by what he was writing, and I found myself having to do some self-reflection as well, because this author was like, hey guys, yeah, the government's not doing enough and the poor suck. But there are people above the poverty line who are not really rich, but they very much benefit from the existence of poor people. So do you benefit from the existence of poor people? And I do. And probably you, unless you yourself are below the poverty line, benefit from the existence of poverty. And it's definitely a difficult fact to face, but it is also really important to do that, because we can't just constantly be pointing fingers at other people. We also have to take responsibility for how we contribute to certain issues. So this focuses on multiple aspects of our country that increase poverty. It also works to disprove certain beliefs, like, hey, the poor are lazy, the poor just want free things, immigrants are the issue. Things like that. It's seeking to prove that those things are not in fact true. Things like bringing low-income housing into our area of town will increase crime. So not only does he prove who is responsible, he also proves that other people that are often blamed and scapegoated are not the problem. So I think that this is really an all-encompassing story that really gives you a deep, in-depth view of poverty within America and what is causing it today and what happened throughout American history that has brought us to this point. So I had a really great time. Let me find some lines to read because there are quite a few impactful lines in here. So let me find them. One thing that I found really shocking, it says poverty measures exclude everyone in prison and in jail, not to mention those housed in psych wards, halfway homes, and homeless shelters, which means there are millions more poor Americans than official statistics let on. I was like, excuse me? Because I feel like the number of poor that they report is already really high, and knowing that they're excluding these groups who are obviously going to be below the poverty line, like, make that make sense. We have this line right here. It says, over the course of American history, immigrants have served as a scapegoat for economic anxieties. The Chinese as a class are a detriment and a curse to our country, reads a newspaper column from 1877. They have supplanted white labor and taken the bread out of the mouths of white men and their families. In early 1900s, native-born white Americans lashed out at Italian immigrants for landing jobs and working hard in them, even resorting to mob violence and lynching to drive them out of town. Conservatives today who cast blame on immigrants for dragging down wages and displacing native workers are carrying forward an old American tradition. Oh, and as a supporter of abortion, you know that I gotta talk about the line that talked about how not having access to abortion is detrimental to women when it comes to finances. This is referring to the Turnaway study, which was done in the University of California, San Francisco. The study's design was groundbreaking and rigorous, and its findings were as unequivocal as they were unsettling. Compared to women who had had abortions, those forced to give birth were more likely to live below the poverty line 4 years later. The two groups of women were on similar paths at the time they got pregnant, but access to abortion caused their paths to diverge. Months and even years after receiving the consequential yes or no during their ultrasound, women turned away at abortion clinics were less likely to hold down full-time jobs, less likely to be able to afford necessities, and more likely to be trapped in abusive relationships. Their children suffered too. Many women who received abortions went on to have children later. When researchers compared those children to children born after women were denied abortions, they found that children in the latter group were far more likely to grow up poor. So, lots of great topics that are relevant to today discussed in here. Love this author. Anytime he puts something out there, I will be reading it. This video is already almost an hour long. All right, so up next for a physical read, you could choose between Monstrilio and the Southern Book Club Guide to Slaying Vampires, which is a long title that I always kind of stumble over. But you guys went ahead and selected it, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. I am finally reading my first Grady Hendrix, and I ended up having a wonderful time with this book. I ended up rating it 4.5 stars. I have to admit, going into the story, I didn't know if I would like it, if I would hate it, if I would feel blah about it. Honestly, a lot of Grady Hendrix's work I hear mixed things about, so I kind of just went into this like, we'll give it a go. This book follows a group of housewives who have formed a book club where they read true crime novels, which is, you know, not really something that women of their time should be reading about. Our main character is Patricia, and she is newer to this town. She kind of feels like we've made it, you know, us and our children are now in this really safe neighborhood where no one needs to lock the doors, the kids can ride out on their bike, and no one worries about anything until a new man moves into town, and our character sees something that makes her suspect that he is a vampire. And so she tries to get the support of her community to remove this man because clearly he is a threat to their children. However, surprise, surprise, people aren't that eager to listen to a housewife. This book definitely had some pretty gross scenes in it. It definitely got very dark, so definitely check out trigger warnings before going into it. I ended up really enjoying kind of the way the story made me think. More so than the plot, it was kind of the commentary of the story that had me intrigued. Obviously, this is a story that is heavily focusing on not believing women. Could this be an analogy kind of, or metaphor or whatever, for sexual assault, that we have someone infiltrating the safe space of women and both men and women not doing anything about it, especially when it is being done to people of color? Sure, and especially since there is an actual off-page sexual assault scene, but it is talked about in here, you could definitely argue that. On top of that, it's just talking about how women are seen as lesser and that their fears, their opinions, their observations of the world around them is just not taken quite as seriously. In this book, we very much see these women having to fight against their husbands who are like dude bros with this guy who's a vampire, and they're constantly believing him over the women. And it really goes to show that men are dangerous to women on multiple levels, not just when they are physically attacking them, but when they are not believing them and are creating safe spaces for dangerous men, which in turn obviously creates unsafe spaces for women. And I feel like these men in here are like, we're the protectors, we are the providers. They give the vibe of feeling they are more qualified to recognize a threat. And so they are dismissing these women's threats as being paranoid because women are just so emotional that they jump at everything, and so you can't take their concerns that serious because who are they to know what a threat looks like? That is left to the man, to the providers, to the protectors. On top of the obvious commentary about women being oppressed and not being believed, and being put in dangerous situations due to, you know, men's blind loyalty to each other. We also have some commentary on like racism. In the beginning of this book, the vampire is primarily going after people within a community that is full of people of color. And so obviously it is not seen as such a threat when people of color are disappearing, because people's prejudice against these people is constantly making excuses for why these people are gone, that these people are just constantly making wrong decisions and reckless decisions in their life. So it's no surprise that they end up dead or missing. And that is obviously preventing them from actually seeing the real threat. So lots of great stuff. I thought the plot was really interesting. I think Patricia was her name Patricia? Let me double check. It was something, yeah, it is. I think Patricia was a really interesting character. There was a direction that the story went about halfway through that definitely took me by surprise, and I think that was a very interesting thing for the author to do. So had a really good time with this. We'll definitely be checking out more Grady Hendrix. All right, before we get into the final poll, I want to talk about that one more book that I picked up without creating a poll for it. It is The Bite Marks and Fluoride by Senyo Yanze. And essentially, I was just feeling some boy love manga, and so I went ahead and picked up one of the ones that I owned. This, I believe, is a standalone, so I figured it would be fun to just pick it up, read it in one night, get my fill of a male romance, and that is what this book did for me. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. Not my favorite. This is obviously a vampire story. We are following this guy. Don't ask me either of their names. I have long forgotten. And he is injured protecting this guy one day, and it is a fatal injury. And this guy, as kind of a, I can't let him die because he was like trying to save me, turns him into a vampire and now has to kind of like prepare him for the fact that he is going to turn into a vampire soon. So essentially, he is not actually really a vampire in the story. He has just been bitten. He is at the first stage, and eventually over the course of the next few days, weeks, months, it's kind of different per person, he will turn into a vampire. And obviously his life is going to change dramatically when that happens. On top of that, it seems that people who have been bitten but haven't been turned into a vampire yet, their blood is like more delicious than anyone else's blood, and so he is obviously seeking to protect him from other vampires, and this causes the two of them to become closer and closer throughout the story. This does have some explicit scenes in it, only a couple, so to me it wasn't anything crazy. I did enjoy the characters, especially him. He is a real sweetheart, and he was kind of chill about being turned into a vampire. He was kind of like, okay, you know, I guess this is the direction my life is taking, like unexpected, not like 100% excited about it, but you know, that's life. And he, on the other hand, is someone who is very old and has never had a companion such as this. And so he's kind of like learning and figuring out how to handle these new emotions. The one thing I didn't really enjoy about this book is I feel like it had a lot of lore that wasn't common vampire lore, and for a standalone, I felt like it was kind of weird to try and do all of this world building, and so the story felt a little bit surface level to me, and I kind of wish that we had spent more time developing their relationship rather than kind of learning more about vampires. So I was kind of a little bit disappointed by that, and that's why it only got a 3.5. All right, guys, so going into the final poll, it was for physical books. I had made a post letting you guys know that I wasn't going to pick up any more audiobooks this month, and I still haven't picked any up. I'm just not in the mood for them. But as far as the physical poll, we were able to choose, or you were able to choose, between two Akwaeke Emezi books. And let me explain a little bit what happened here. So this is what the poll looks like today as I'm filming this, and as you can see, You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty is in the lead. However, at the time that I ended up finishing the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, Pet was in the lead, so I ended up picking up Pet, but then I saw that they were tied, and I was like, okay. And then I checked later, and this one was in the lead. And I was like, okay. And then I checked later and they were tied. And I was like, And then I checked later and this was in the lead again. So essentially what I decided to do, since I had already started this, was to read this and then pick this one up. So let's talk about Pet, and then we'll talk a little bit about this one. Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. I went into this thinking it was a middle grade. It is technically tagged as middle grade, but it is also tagged as young adult, and I would definitely lean towards young adult for this one, especially since there is swearing in this, which was kind of what tipped me off to this probably not being middle grade. I don't read a ton of middle grade, but as far as I know, there's no swearing in that, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But in this book, we are following Jam, and she is a young transgender teenager. I want to say she's probably around 16 years old. I'm like 90% certain. So that's another reason I think it's more young adult. And she has a mother who is a painter, and she lives in this town where there are no monsters. Essentially, the angels came. They're not literal angels, but they were like really good people who came and got rid of all the monsters and created rules to make it so that monsters could not come back. And life is a lot safer than it was when her parents were young. And one day her mom ends up painting this really weird painting. Jam is like, all right, that looks great, Mom. And this painting ends up coming to life. This painting presents itself to Jam and says, you can call me Pet. And I am not a monster, but I'm here to hunt a monster. And that monster is in your friend's home. And Jam is obviously like, monsters don't exist anymore. I love my friend's family. I've been there many times. There is just no way that there is someone in there who is hurting other people. However, she also realizes that she can't just send Pet away and not look into this, because if there is someone hurting someone in her friend's home, she has an obligation to look into that and make sure that they are caught and stopped. And essentially, we are following her as she is trying to figure out who that is and kind of coming to terms with the fact that this promise that monsters don't exist is just not true. Now, I knew from the very beginning who the monster was. As soon as I met them, I was like, yep, that's the monster. And I also knew, even before starting this book, what kind of crimes they were committing. Was I supposed to know that information? I don't know. This is not a thriller, so me knowing all that information going into the story did not bother me. It did make me curious though, because to me, it was very obvious looking at the information that Pet had provided, and just me knowing information about this type of monster in the world that I live in, it made it very obvious to me. But Jam, on the other hand, was raised in a world where monsters don't exist, and so they're not really taught what a monster looks like, because it doesn't matter. They don't exist. And that in a way made it even easier for these monsters to hide, because no one's really looking for them anymore. And I thought that was very interesting. I think that this book really shows that it's important to educate people. She ends up going to the library to get information, and the librarian says, there are a lot of people that wouldn't want me giving this kind of information to a child, but it's very important for children to have this information so that they can see the threat as well. So I think that this book had a really great commentary in it. I ended up giving it 4 stars. It's a really high 4-star, and sometimes I wonder if I want to bump it up to a 4.5. I'm kind of like waffling on that a little bit. I felt, one, that the story was maybe not as deep as it could be. Again, this is for a younger audience, so that's probably why. To me, a lot of this was very much in your face. You know, the monster would say the truth doesn't matter if you believe it or not, kind of stuff, which is true. Things are true whether you believe them to be true or not. Our character being filled with fear at the thought of her friend being hurt, and that fear causing her to in turn believe that there is no threat just because that's what the mind can handle the best, is all things that we have probably experienced ourselves. I would also say that Jam frustrated me throughout this story. I felt she lacked a little bit of urgency throughout this. There is a time where she notifies her friend of the threat, and obviously her friend doesn't take this very well. It's a terrible thing to learn. And Pet, our hunter, is like, hey, we need to go and we need to take out this monster because at any moment the person that they are hurting could be hurt again. There's no time to waste. And Jam would almost be like, hey, we need to kind of slow down and we need to make sure that my friend is okay. And I'm like, you know what? I think that's really great that you want to be there to support your friend, but we can all go to therapy after the monster is captured. Let's focus on getting the monster in the here and now and deal with the trauma afterwards. So to me, you know, that wasn't handled the best. I think that while we definitely have to be understanding of people's emotions, sometimes we do have to prioritize people's safety over people's feelings. And I don't feel like Jam did that. On the other hand, Jam was saying some things, I'm obviously not going to go into detail because it's at the end of the book, that I was like, stop saying that. Like, I don't agree with that. Like, no. Let's not do that. And then the more she explained her reasoning, the more I was like, okay, I see what you're doing here. And she was able to go ahead and get me on her side. It's not very often where I completely disagree with a character and they are able to go ahead and switch me over to their side. So shout out to Jam for being able to do that. So a solid 4-star. Potentially a 4.5. I have been thinking about it a little bit. Maybe I'll sit on it for a few more days, and if I'm still really thinking about it, maybe I'll bump it up. Now let's talk about the other Akwaeke Emezi book, which, as you can see, I am currently reading. So why is it featured in this video when clearly I should be talking about it in next month's wrap up? That would be because I am temporarily DNFing this book. This is in no way a permanent DNF. You know I love Akwaeke Emezi. I was just talking about one of their books. However, I am just not in the headspace for this book. I have been struggling to pick this book up, and that is for multiple reasons. One of them, I just really think that I am still very much in my contemporary romance slump. And while this is not like a lot of contemporary romances, it is still technically within that genre. And that's just not really what I want here and now. This book follows, I hope her name is Faye, because it's F-E-Y-I, and I'm not really sure how to pronounce that. So I just been calling her Faye, and she lost her husband 5 years ago in a car accident. They were both in a car accident, but he was the only one who ended up dying. Obviously, this has really negatively impacted her, and at the beginning of the year, 5 years after his death, she has decided it's time to start dating again, to just kind of get out there. She starts this process by hooking up with a guy, and they kind of start a casual relationship that is mostly sexual. However, she decides to end that, and one of his friends steps forward and lets her know that he's interested in dating her as well. And she's like, I'm not really looking for a sexual relationship. I just tried that. Not really sure if I'm ready to move forward with that. And he was like, yeah, no, that's okay. We can just take it very slow. So she is essentially friends with this guy, but they're definitely more than friends. And he ends up asking her to go to the islands with him for the summer because he stays with his dad during that time, and he wants her to be there with him. And also she has the opportunity to show some of her work in a gallery there, or an art show. And when she goes there and meets his dad, she is instantly like attracted to him, like sexually attracted to him. And I have never been an insta lust fan. That's not really my jam. As an asexual, to me, it's unrealistic. I'm like, you would never just see someone and want to sleep with them, which I know isn't true. I know that there are people that, you know, see people and are instantly sexually attracted to them. But to me, it's not really something that I can relate to, and it's not like the way I like to see a relationship start. And so I have to admit the start of the relationship was a bit of a turnoff. I am on page 109, and her and the father are in no way in a relationship. In fact, at this point, the father seems to like her, but not to seem to have any sort of romantic interest in her. Right now, it's very one-sided. But I struggle with Faye as a character a little bit, and even before she met the father, she is very unsure of what she wants and what she needs, which is fine, but I feel like it's kind of weird for her to start a relationship with Nasir, who is the man that she's seeing friends with, when she is so uncertain. To me, this sounds like a personal journey that she needs to take on her own and doesn't need to drag someone along with her. So for me, I feel like she decided, I'm gonna start dating. She maybe figured out maybe it's not the time, but then she still decided to still continue to try dating. Yeah, and to me, I feel like that wasn't the right thing to do. And then, of course, her feelings towards Nasir's father, what was his name? Alim. His name is Alim. Felt random. Like, I mean, the guy seems like he's cool. He seems chill. You know, he's just vibing. Like, to me, he hasn't done anything to evoke these strong feelings of lust within her. So I'm a little uncertain about where these feelings came from. On top of that, I feel like the author was doing, I don't want to say full-blown character assassination, but Nasir seriously seemed like such a great guy. Like, he was respecting her boundaries. He in no way was trying to pressure her to do anything she didn't want to do. Showed a lot of patience, was very kind. He was very understanding when she talked about the grief of her husband and everything along those lines. Great, awesome guy. But then, like, literally right before they met his father, suddenly he started acting weird, talking about like how his father is effeminate and how people think he's gay all the time, and it kind of made him seem kind of homophobic. And on top of that, her and Alim were talking about art, and despite the fact that Nasir has mentioned on multiple occasions that he is an art collector, all of a sudden he's like, I don't know anything about art. And it just, to me, it was like you presented Nasir as this perfect person for her, who would be willing to wait, who was very understanding, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, we don't want Nasir, we want Alim. And to me, I don't like when authors do that. So there was just a couple of things in this book that were turning me off. So I am going to go ahead and temporarily DNF it. I don't know when I'm going to pick it up again, if it'll be soon, if I'll just continue, or if it's going to be a longer time and I'll have to start over. But either way, for now, it's a no for me. All right, guys, this was a very long wrap up. I apologize. Thank you if you are still here. And I hope that you guys had a great reading month as well. Let me know your favorite and your least favorite book. My least favorite, if I don't include the DNFs, is gonna be What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. And my favorite, I did have a few 5 stars, but I am gonna have to go with The Sunbearer Trials by Aiden Thomas, just because as soon as I finished this, I was so eager to pick up the next book, and I am reading it now. How exciting for me. But that being said, guys, thank you again for helping me pick my books. I will definitely be allowing you guys to do that again. You guys have proven yourself capable of picking some really great books, maybe even better than I know how to pick them. That being said, as always, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!